let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in importance of
what
is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. Welcome to the Level Up Hour, where we usually talk about containers, Kubernetes, and OpenShift. However, and please do like, subscribe, and share if those are topics that you are interested in. But today we actually have a very special episode. I'm very excited about it. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Scott McBrien, the legendary Stabby Mick. And we'll introduce our guest in a moment. But Scott, these are exciting times in the world of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which will be our focus today. So first, a look backwards. What is the anniversary that we are celebrating this year?
Well, this year marks 20 years of Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, 20 years.
And so I reached deep into the wardrobe vault to get a shirt from yesteryear that I think is probably about that vintage. So, a look backwards there at 20 years of what, Red Hat Enterprise Linux has contributed to the world. But today is actually interesting in another respect. And why is that?
Because today should be the general availability announcement of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9. We started uploading bits to the customer portal and content distribution networks yesterday. So I see, for example, Luna Jernberg has said that they were installing RHEL 9 already because the content was available in some places yesterday. But we don't do a GA announcement until the content is all the places. So that includes marketplaces and a whole bunch of other places. So for most people, they saw it yesterday, but we will go out to the world and say that it's available today.
It's getting there. It's getting there. But it is now official. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9 is with us, and we're very excited to talk about that today with our guest, Mr. Jim Nauer, who is a systems engineer with Case Western Reserve University. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning. Good to be here.
And, one of the things that we're going to do is, it's just released today, but we can actually draw from a lot of experience working with the beta program, because when we release a version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it will usually have been through actually a fairly extensive beta period in which it will have been beaten quite thoroughly by capable people like Jim out there in the world. And so today we're going to explore some of the capabilities that are in RHEL 9, some of the adventures that perhaps were encountered while using the RHEL 9 beta. And we're going to also, dare we say it, do a live demo on how you can build standard operating environment using system roles within Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9. So, Scott, did I forget anything?
Only what could possibly go wrong with a live demo?
And so maybe we should, before we launch into it, talk a little bit about the new release cadence, and then we'll go right in. So, Scott, maybe you can elaborate a bit.
Sure. And I think Jim knows this probably all too well since he consumes it.
He lives it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we released RHEL 8, we said that we were going to release major releases of RHEL every 3 years. So RHEL 8 released in May 2019, and here we are May 2022, and there's RHEL 10. So in spring, summer 2025, we should expect RHEL 10, right? So no secrets. That's what we're doing every 3 years.
Well, and I think that's a great value, Jim. What are your thoughts there?
Well, so as a customer, I love the shorter release cadence. 5 years was too long. to be really, really honest. And in particular, because I'm in academia, I've got a kind of schizophrenic use case where I am responsible for servers running $1.5 billion a year business on one side. And on the other side, I've got researchers who want bleeding edge. So we absolutely want the enterprise and enterprise Linux. We depend on it to run our business, but at the same time, we really do need an up-to-date userland and an update kernel and C library so that the latest and greatest software can build against it, because that's what our researchers want to run. They do also sometimes, buy a machine and then never upgrade it for like 15 years. And, you can't take it away from them until you pry it out of their cold, dead hands or until the magic black smoke comes out of it.
Right.
But when they're first building stuff, it's got to be brand new. And that has been a real challenge in the enterprise Linux world. So,
well, it's really interesting to look at the history of that, as both of you will recall, is that if we think about the predecessor to Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we had Red Hat Linux, which was on a major release cadence of 1.5 years approximately, and customers said, could you please stop? And partners were like, no, we cannot work with this. And with the advent of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we went to something that was a more enterprise friendly sort of cadence, and it was a few years. And then we had a few releases where it seemed like we went for a really, really, really long time. Yeah, exactly. It just elongated. And I think that we're now about right-sized with this new cadence, because I think it allows for both of those use cases that you're talking about, where on the one hand, if you want to hang on to that release for a long time, there are options to be able to do that. But on the other hand, when we think about being able to innovate, move forward, use new functionality and things like that, that we're also providing an enterprise-ready version of that on that sort of time frame that people need. So I think this is a very exciting change. So Scott, why don't we actually switch things up a little bit today and go straight to the demo? I mean, seriously, what could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? So the demo that we're going to do today is on RHEL system roles. And the reason I chose this one is because I know that Jim has been working on building his standard operating environment for RHEL 9. And I think that's one of the things that we're probably going to touch on during our discussion later. And one of the tools that we started shipping with RHEL 7, continued in RHEL 8, and will even more continue in RHEL 9, is RHEL system roles. So this is some Ansible roles that allow you to apply configuration to your system population. It comes with RHEL. We need to install the Ansible core RPM, which is going to give us the Ansible bits we need to run our playbooks. And to that end, let me go over to my VM here, and I'm going to entitle it. And I'm going to do this a little bit the old-fashioned way and use the Ansible engine repo, which is not present in RHEL 9. In RHEL 9, you have to use the Ansible core RPM. And once that's done, I'll be able to install the Ansible RPM as well as the RHEL system roles. Right, so I'm just going to use yum or DNF, since they're really the same, to install these two packages. And again, for RHEL 9, that would be Ansible-core is the name of the package you want, and RHEL system roles. And what we're getting from this is a whole selection of Ansible roles that allow us to execute certain changes across our population. So just like normal Ansible, it can be distributed. For the purposes of our demo today, I'm just going to be doing it locally on this system. But we could set up some host configuration and actually push it out to more than one box. All right, and then I've got an already existing playbook. So this existing playbook that I've created for our demo today, down here, are the inclusion of two of our system roles. So one that I've selected is the kernel settings. So this allows me to go over to make changes in the procsys directory as well as /sys. It actually uses tuned behind the scenes to make the changes permanent. And then the other one that I've selected is the tlog system role. So tlog is the session recording that we ship with RHEL 8 and 9, and it allows me to record people's terminal sessions so that I can play back that session later and see kind of what happened during their shell session. All right, so just to show that things are working, if I take a look at just one of the values that's in the list for the kernel settings. Right, so swappiness on the system is currently 30. You can see that my value, my target value, my system role is 20. And you know what? I'll go ahead and show you the other one too, dirty ratio. Right, so this one says that when my dirty pages are 30% of memory, I should like wake up and do things. And we're going to change that to 40% of memory. Right, and then there's a couple others here as well, like semaphore values and whatnot. All right, so the whole goal here is to create a playbook that you can execute across your environment to set up kind of your standard operating environment. So if I do an Ansible playbook, and give it my playbook name, it'll go through and start executing those changes. And if this playbook wasn't just bound to localhost, but actually had like a additional host configuration, it would connect out to those hosts and apply the playbooks on them as well.
The suspense is killing me.
Right. Yeah, so notice that for this one, for system roles, I actually didn't have the system role RPMs installed, or sorry, not system role, session recording. So it took care of installing the software for me, in addition to making the changes to the configuration to enable it. All right, so here we are, we're done. And remember, when we looked at this last time, swappiness was set to 30, but in my playbook, I had asked it to be set to 20. Cool. And then the other thing was the dirty ratio had been set to 30%. I had asked for it to be set to 40%. Cool. All right, so now if you want to make a change, like 20% swappiness, or sorry, a value of 20 is not small enough swappiness for you. You could come in here and change it and rerun your playbook. And again, if you added in more hosts, it would then apply this change across all the hosts in the host list. And then if any of the hosts had gotten out of whack because somebody had like manually adjusted something on them, running this playbook again would reset them all to your standard operating environment settings. All right, so it was 20, and now it's 10. All right, so you have like one place where you can manage this. And it's not just the kernel tunables or session recording, like if I SSH localhost, right, right here, session recording was installed and enabled and activated, and now it just happens on all the boxes that I apply this playbook to. We can also add in more stuff. So if we wanted to, we could do things like add a crony time configuration to the box by adding a new system role and then adding a new section to our playbook to indicate what parameters we wanted there. So that's a little bit on system roles. There's like a bunch of them. More recent ones, there's one for firewall D, so you can make firewall changes across your population. There's one that was tech preview, but is now fully supported for configuring postfix. So you can apply postfix changes throughout your organization. There's one for VPN configuration, so you can actually do VPN connection configuration throughout your population. So there's a bunch, and we're going to continue to increase that, the list of things that you can apply across your population using system rules.
So, and I just saw there's an interesting question came up in the chat about using Ansible for config files under /etc. And that's been my favorite thing to automate for several years now, even before I was using Ansible. We were a Puppet shop. And I just want to point out one of the new features that landed within the last week in both RHEL 8.6 and 9.0. If you notice over the years, Red Hat has been adding or changing configuration files to use an include directive and a file name .d directory. So and we've kind of been doing this for years with the cron.d directory and some other stuff. The sshdconfig just landed. sshdconfig can now be concatenated out of blocks in a .d directory. You've been able to do that for years with sudoers, for example, sudoers.d. Instead of trying to massage a single large file, you can drop.
Well, and potentially break that large file too. That's the other thing.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic use case for tools like Puppet and Ansible. And it's getting easier all the time with those include directory style configuration files. Much easier to deal with, where you don't have to try and surgically snip out one line and replace it. You put in building blocks, and it's really made my life a lot easier. In fact, that was an open RFE that I had against RHEL 8 was, could you please add this feature to sshdconfig? And it was closed last week. It's done. It's there. We got it now.
Cool. Well, so that was a pretty cool demo. Scott, do we want to maybe take a little bit of time to talk about sort of the experience of the RHEL 9 beta and how that went and notable points within that?
Sure. So I can just provide an overview of how we set up the program, and then I think Jim can jump in with some specific experiences. So RHEL 9 was a little bit different in that it was our first release fully done using the new CentOS Stream model. So we announced CentOS Stream when we were doing RHEL 8 stuff, but it was after the release of RHEL 8. So we weren't able to use CentOS Stream at the beginning of the RHEL 8 development lifecycle, but we did use that for RHEL 9. And what's really cool is that we spun up kind of the CentOS Stream repos in summer last year. So even before the beta program got going, we were standing up CentOS Stream and building CentOS Stream and adding packages to it and managing it. And then about in November, we announced the beta, and every subscriber, even those with a free developer subscription, are eligible to access the beta now. So anyone who has a Red Hat subscription can access the beta if they desire. And then we also did what we call a high-touch beta program. So some folks like the esteemed Jim Nauer here were nominated by their by internal Red Hatters. Jim's a part of a program called Accelerators.
Where Accelerators.
So we selected some people to have a more curated beta experience where we meet with them periodically through town halls to give updates about what's going on in different aspects of the product. And that's a little bit more exclusive, I guess. I don't know how to describe it in a nice way. For
curated sounded good,
okay.
Or guided, or maybe there's just more avenues for I guess exchange. Jim, what are your thoughts in terms of sort of working within that particular program?
Well, so as a customer, I certainly appreciate having access to that kind of that kind of capability. It's not my first rodeo. I've been in the business for 30 years now. I've done closed betas with other vendors and with Red Hat in the past. But really, my favorite part about this is the openness of the process since the CentOS Stream change is basically You mentioned there's have been some, the town hall meetings and what. So there've been some kind of webinars focused only on the high touch beta program participants, and that hasn't really changed. But in the past, the big improvement I see this time around is that everybody in the world has access to the same updates that I've been getting. Whereas in the past, with RHEL 8, the public beta dropped in November, same kind of time frame 3 years ago. And after that, it was total radio silence for 6 months, and then GA dropped. So if you were a customer and you weren't in the high touch beta, you could get a little sneak preview kind of, but you got no bug fixes for 6 months and no security fixes, no nothing. It was just kind of okay, here's a hypothetical peek at maybe what it might be like, but you can't really do anything because none of the bugs are going to get fixed for 6 months. Whereas now the whole world has been getting every 4 weeks, has been getting a drop of new RPM content for RHEL 9. So, whether you're a third-party software vendor or, any customer anywhere in the world, you've had the same access to the software that I have for the last 6 months. And I really like that as a change.
Yeah.
It means even internally in my organization, I don't have to worry quite as much about NDA stuff and say, here, this is the same software everybody else in the world has access to. Go ahead and install it in a test VM and figure out if it works for your use case.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Is you're going to get so many more use cases trying it by having that kind of breadth, right? Because of exactly what you said. There's no NDA. There's no sort of restriction. It's just out there, and so we're going to benefit by having so many more use cases put it through the process. And I also like the point you made about the fact that the beta has in the past been sort of a snapshot, and there it was, and you bump into things, and it's like, well, okay, I'll let you know that this thing happened, but I can't really test my use case until that bug gets resolved. And so now I think with that evolutionary process that you described, it really takes us back to that old open source adage about, many eyes make shallow bugs. This approach is just making so many more eyes, and it's also being cyclical in the sense that you get to see the fix and maybe see through the use case that might have hit a brick wall otherwise with something that was encountered in the beta. So I think it's a great change. Scott, any additional thoughts on that? Or
So one thing. So CentOS Stream is still going, but guess what it is a precursor to now?
9.1. Already out there.
So if you're
talking about it already this week.
Yeah, so if you're interested in tracking what's going to be landing in 9.1, like maybe new modular content for applications and runtimes, that would be a great place to look to see what's in development, to see what is in contention for landing in 9.1.
Cool. So is that something you're going to be looking at, Jim, or are you already looking at it?
I'm probably not going to jump on 9.1 super fast, just because I've already got my hands full of stuff to do with 9.0 and 8.6. And there's a lot of there's a lot of pieces still that need to fall into place. So I think Scott mentioned earlier, I'm working on building my standard operating environment via Ansible, of course. A little longer and more complex, but I love the example you picked, Scott, because some of those kernel tuning settings look like you copied and pasted them right out of the Oracle install guide. So I'm very familiar with those settings. But we also do things like, we have an LDAP and Kerberos authentication set up to go to our enterprise authentication system. We set that all up through Ansible playbooks. And all of our other local customization plus the tuning that we need for the applications. So I'm working on that. Of course, I'm waiting for Satellite 6.11 to drop because we are a satellite shop and heavily dependent on satellite and content views to manage to keep our versions consistent between test and production environments. We also use Red Hat, so we use LDAP for authentication. The LDAP server is Red Hat directory server. the paid product version of 389, which again our business is completely dependent on. So and those are both expected to drop later this summer. So those will be key pieces to getting fully up and running on RHEL 9. I'll kind of watch 9.1 in the background. There's a couple of things. I did open a bunch of support cases during the beta. I was very happy that there were no showstoppers this time. For me, at least, it was all just little annoying paper cut kind of things. Glitches in Anaconda. I found an infinite loop in Anaconda. If you set it up to install from an NFS source and you stupidly screw up and point it to an empty directory instead of the one with the actual ISO files in it, Anaconda will fall into an infinite loop instead of saying file not found.
Well, it keeps looking, right?
Yeah, it's going to try until NFS gives up, which is never. Yeah, so little buglets like that.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple have been resolved. One of them, I was having problems downloading packages because of a wonky hypervisor. It turns out, that was actually testing on my M1 based Mac, which is not supported by Red Hat, but it does work at least for RHEL 9.
You heard it here.
Yeah, so not supported, but I got it running. So
cool. Yeah.
Makes
so
it
there
easy
is
for
one
me.
aspect of the beta that I think merits a bit of mention and clarification, and that is sort of, okay, you have your beta, right? And you say, well, okay, I put it into, I implement it, I'm giving it a shot, putting it through its paces, I'm upgrading with, the updates that get dropped every 4 weeks, and then production comes, and you want to upgrade from the beta to GA. Well, maybe not, right? Comments on that?
That is 100% not supported. So don't ask to do it. We'll tell you no. I think Jim has a concrete example of why we say no.
We had talked about this before. So my personal preference is, first of all, even for upgrades in general, my preference has always been lift and shift instead of upgrade in place. And the betas are no different. I actually ran into problems during the beta program, just doing yum updates from one version to the next with a bare minimal install. It's not an issue, but I had been playing around with the OS build composer packages. And with those installed, I was running into problems where yum update from like beta 3 to beta 4 would fail if you had SE Linux turned on and enforcing, which we all should, as Red Hat's been encouraging for many years. I think in my organization, we've got it turned on maybe 6 machines. A little to-do work there. But I was running the test config with SE Linux enforcing, and it was failing upgrades because of that. And the situation is weird. If you install beta 4 fresh, works perfectly. Yum install OS build composer, works fine. It's just there was something wonky with the SE Linux settings between going from one beta release to the next beta release where they didn't have everything exactly right. And it just didn't work. Unless you do things like disable SE Linux, and then you've got to, go back and, turn it back on and restore con and all kinds of other fun junk. Or, just reinstall, which, it's cases like that, Red Hat doesn't, they give us a lot of support on the GA releases. They support all kinds of crazy scenarios that they don't during the beta. I think another one that people griped about during the beta was secure boot. So when I grabbed the bits last night, I did installed the beta, or installed GA twice last night. Once via a full graphical Anaconda install, and then a second time via Kickstart. Both cases, I did leave secure boot on. It does work. So and now on that VM, now that GA is out, I'm expecting to be able to leave secure boot alone, and it'll work every time, every kernel update. But during the beta program, Red Hat doesn't promise that, and so you need to be aware. So that some of these things, the beta is great, but it's not 100%. It's not GA. So I have a very realistic view of that. So we only have a couple of test machines. They're going to get wiped and rebuilt with GA very soon, probably in the next couple of days.
Well, and I think that's, I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that people who are participating in the beta program understand that it is, it is different in kind, and therefore you have to kind of expect that it's going to be a rebuild for anything that you're using there. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It just means you have to go into it with that expectation at the outset, right?
Absolutely. And if you go in, the beta program is like anything else. You get out of it what you put into it. And if you go in knowing that you're going to have to do this work, and including tearing down your beta environments and replacing with GA when you're all done at the end, it's not a big deal. Particularly in my case, like I said, the second install I did, we do all of our installs in our operating environment via Kickstart. So, and we'll either kickstart a template, a gold master template for VMware, or just straight up kickstart install on the very rare machines anymore that are still bare metal. And then, the automation that Kickstart brings to the table makes it super easy to get exactly the same install every time. We've been using that for most of the time that RHEL has existed. I think I started back in the RHEL 3 days.
So Kickstart has existed well beyond RHEL. Like that was in Red Hat Linux.
Yeah. And it has evolved, but it remains, it's good to hear that it's still a useful tool after all these years, because again, we're looking at 20 years of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and there are things that were good ideas 20 years ago, and they're still good ideas today. So, what are some other sorts of improvements or adventures that we encountered with the beta?
I have one.
Yeah.
We published beta UBI images for the first time with RHEL 9. And that was interesting, but also unique in that like the signing keys that we used for them were the beta ones. So you had to do a little bit of work on your container hosts in order to not have it throw up about the content not matching your known signatures. As a side note, the UBI 9 GA versions are all available in the container catalog today. So you can go out and find them and not have to worry about updating to the Red Hat beta key for signatures and whatnot. But that was interesting because we had never done that before. We had always, UBI was introduced after RHEL 8 was released by a couple of months. But now we've gotten really good at building and dropping them pretty much the same day as not only majors, but also dot releases.
Well, and I'll just, do a shameless plug here that you actually did a really good episode. Actually, we did an episode, I believe, with Scott McCarty on UBI, and I think you've subsequently done some additional episodes. And so if you're interested in UBI, and that's not something you're familiar with, well, take a look through some of our episodes and, find that episode. And I don't know. I'm trying to remember if we covered some of the things that you're discussing in one of your demos. I don't know.
What?
What?
There have been so many.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying. Look at them, find them. You put out a lot of stuff there, Scott. All right. So, what are some? Did we have any mistakes to avoid that we haven't covered? I mean, things that we might want to guide people away from.
Mistakes. Well, aside from that empty directory for the Kickstart install,
I like that one.
That was a doozy.
I mean, there's a certain logic to it. It's like, well, okay, so not accessing NFS
Wow.
now, but it might come back.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot. In fact, we talked about this before last as we were prepping for this show. How do you make something boring exciting? And to me, the RHEL 9 beta has been boring in the best possible way. No real surprises, and by and large, the stuff that I've needed has worked. There's some. We can talk about some interesting new features and how I'm testing them and what the future expectation might hold. So interesting feature, RHEL 9 allegedly is the first version that has a year 2038 compatible file system. If you look in the release notes, both XFS and ext4 have been updated to handle date and timestamps past January 2038, which you say is, who cares? These are machines we're building in 2022. That's 16 years from now. Terrifying thing that I maybe shouldn't admit in public. I've got one RHEL 4 machine still running in production. That's a 17-year-old operating system.
Yeah.
And that can only happen when things have gone horribly, horribly wrong. And yes, we have an application upgrade that has been horribly, horribly abused and neglected.
We have customers who have needs for very extended life cycles, because very often it might involve that they're, if we think about something like a railway system, for example, they work on timeframes that are very, very different from a lot of other sectors, because you're buying trains. You want to use that train for a long time. And, consequently, a lot of IT infrastructure is also very long time horizon. So yeah, 2038 seems like forever away, but in a way for certain sectors, it's really not that far away at all. Or even to look at your particular case where you've got the cutting edge researchers, and wanting the bleeding edge, it still seems like you also have some use cases where, 16 years is just not that far off.
Yeah, it can get a little ugly sometimes as far as those upgrades. And it's weird thinking that the 10-year support life cycle of RHEL is long. But yeah, you mentioned, certain industries, a single decade doesn't cut the mustard. And they think on multi-decade timelines.
Absolutely.
So software that will last is kind of important. And the fact that the file system changed, that came up in our beta testing. One of the things I've been doing, aside from building our standard operating environment, is we also have a qualification checklist that we go through. Is does this work? Does this work? Does this work? Does this work? And one of them is, does our backup software work? So we use a big enterprise-y backup solution from a major vendor everyone's heard of. Don't need to mention who it is, but and the majority of our environments in VMware. So we have a lot of virtual machines, and we've shifted in recent years to mostly using VM image-based backups. We still have some databases in particular. You want to have an old school agent on the machine so it can do the right thing with hot backup mode and get the right files and all that jazz. But by and large, we're using image backup and restore. The catch there is we tested against the RHEL 9 beta. The image backup, of course, works fine. VMware doesn't care what the bits look like on the disk. It's just an image. Back it up, restore it, done. But the file level restore doesn't work because the backup software depends on a proxy VM to grab the restored image, mount it, and let you browse the files and pick the one that you want to restore. And of course, their proxy image is not running RHEL 9 GA because it's been 40 minutes since GA has been available. So obviously, short term we can't do file level restore. We got to do image level restore. But I got half of a checkbox there on the list checked off.
Yep. So we do have a few.
We'll check with the vendor. We'll do the updates. We might have to wait months for that to land, but you expect that with a new OS release.
Yep. So I was noticing that we have a question in the chat asking, is the RHEL 9 UBI 9 using x86 64 v2 microarchitecture level?
Yeah,
Any
I asked
thought?
for clarification on that because I don't know what he means by microarchitecture level.
Oh, well, there you
So
go.
it is UBI the same way that RHEL 8 is UBI.
Mhm.
So if you were using RHEL 8 in the way that meets your needs, then UBI 9 should also be architected and built in the same way.
Right. And Demon Doctor mentioned having a RHEL 3 server hobbling around for years, the nightmare. Well, I mean, there does come to be the point where, there's enough differences that people might not remember how to actually get it to do what you want, not to mention the absence of any sort of updates, upgrades, anything. That's something to think about. RHEL 3. I also saw that Mike Jones had said that he'd like to see the Anaconda installer handle multiple network connections, at least to be able to ignore the second or third network connection while installing on physical servers. Any thoughts or input on that?
So I had asked if Mike had opened an RFE in bugzilla.redhat.com to request that. I know that there's some other weird things about Anaconda networking. One of my favorite irritations is that in order to statically configure a network interface, you have to specify its name. But we use predictable naming, which like assigns the name based off of PCI slot and port number
Yep.
and other things,
which of course
might not.
in the VM world isn't predictable anymore.
Right.
So,
And even in the hardware world, like until
Depending
you
on the hardware you have.
how do you know what it is? Yeah.
Yeah.
that's
And so that's one that like you end up doing things like turning off predictable naming in the installer to like get the name that you need and then maybe
I just
reestablish it later.
feed it a command line like this long when I'm doing my Kickstart installs that sets it up right, kills all the stuff I don't want, including the netf names, BIOS dev names. Yeah, and it's been a long time since I because we only have a handful of bare metal machines. It's been a while since, but I since Mike Jones brought it up, I'm remembering. Oh God, yeah, those. If you got a machine with like 8 NICs in it or 8 NIC ports, it configures the first port, and then you gotta sit there twiddling your thumbs while you wait for a DHCP timeout on 7 of them, which they're they're not even cabled up. Why isn't it skipping all these? It's like it didn't use ETH tool to check if the link is up.
And one of the other gotchas for 9 is we've obsoleted the network scripts directory in files. So if you look in Etsy system scripts, it is empty. Instead, that's all managed through Network Manager now. You can make changes to the file configuration, but you have to do it through the new location for Network Manager to pick it up. So that was a for people who are used to like operating at the file level and in their PostScripts, they're doing seds to like change things. Yeah, no, you probably don't want to do that anymore. NMCLI is your friend.
Yep. Yeah, well, that's something that's been a long time in coming, but I think finally it sounds like we cut the cord.
So I haven't even checked. So does that mean Network Manager is now in the at base or at core install? Is it for? It was not in 7, and it might not be in 8 either.
It is the default for 8.
Okay. Well,
for 8, we shipped something called networking that was like just scripts. So you could disable Network Manager and use networking, but you didn't want to do that in 8. It was basically like people who were really, really fighting the change would do that to themselves out of spite. And in 9, like, nope.
Take a look. You're making me think I need to log into our HPC cluster later today and take a peek, because we are transitioning that in our high performance compute cluster into from RHEL 7 to RHEL 8, and I I am quite positive they had Network Manager not even installed on the RHEL 7 systems. And I'm not, now that you bring it up, I'm not sure how they're handling 8. Because they do like a lot of control, because these are machines that have complex network topologies, connected to 3 different networks, different speeds, different, this interface has to be set up just so that way, and that one's got to be just so the other way, and you got to pay attention to MTU, and it's a real nightmare.
So
To get right.
in RHEL 6, Network Manager was not the best. In RHEL 7, it was pretty good, but because of the experience in 6, we didn't make it the default. And in 8, it is the default and works pretty much interchangeably. So it would work with the IFCFG scripts in 8. So you likely made the change and never even noticed the change. And it's not until 9 that
I've been using Network Manager. I think I started with 7. I looked at it in 6, said, ran away. But because it was the default and Red Hat was really going that way, I learned years ago, fighting your vendor is rarely productive. You can do it for a while and get away with it, but so it's like I can see the handwriting on the wall, and so pretty much all of my production machines have been using Network Manager for years. There were some glitches in the RHEL 7 days, a couple of behavioral changes that crept in on the dot releases that threw me for a loop, required going back and changing stuff. It's been pretty good in the RHEL 8 for my stuff. The high performance compute world, like I said, they have a whole separate provisioning mechanism and build scripts and whatnot that are somewhat built off of Kickstart again. And their automation system was violently allergic to Network Manager, at least in the RHEL 7 days. I don't know if the RHEL 8 version has completely got with the program or not. I'll find out.
So, hearing about the change to Network Manager in particular, and the end of the network scripts directory that has been around for a very, very long time, puts me in the mood to do another shameless plug. I don't do too many of them, but I'm going to occasionally do one. And in this case, I'm going to say that with the release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9, coming right on that as well is the Red Hat training and certification. It has updated System Administration 1 and System Administration 2 classes for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9, and the Red Hat Certified System Administrator exam will also likewise be available for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9. And so if you're somebody like me who is a little more steeped in the old way of doing things, that might not be a bad time to say, well, okay, let me catch up a few things and see how things are being done now. Of course, if you're somebody just joining the world of Red Hat, in particular the world of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, I strongly recommend that. That's a really good path towards learning about Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9 and its capabilities and how to do things. And again, if you've been with us for a while and you know stuff inside and out, I think Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9 is seen as a very evolutionary as opposed to revolutionary release, but it still has some things like what we were just talking about, where the way you did things in the past might not necessarily be the way you'll be doing them going forward. And this would be a great way to learn more. Scott, any additional thoughts?
No, we were talking about when it was being announced and whatnot. I saw just now on Twitter the Red Hat Enterprise Linux handle announced it. So it's official.
It is official. We can actually talk about it now. And actually the very evil toaster pointed out that just got their RHCSA for RHEL 8. Well, you know what? Here's the good news: is even though we mentioned this thing with with Network Manager and some other things that are probably a bit different, that RHEL 8 knowledge is going to apply almost entirely to what you do in RHEL 9. Jim, do you have some thoughts on sort of the the taking those RHEL 8 skills to RHEL 9? I mean, would my statement be mostly accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, for what it's worth, I just got my RHCSA 8 a couple months ago. So I had it for RHEL 7 a bunch of years ago, long enough that it had actually expired. But the point that the official training material, the classes, the workbooks, the labs, the Red Hat produces, do tend to zero in very much on the what's new stuff. Red Hat does focus on things you need to know to use. Firewall D in RHEL 7 was a big deal.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff about Network Manager that you have to know. You're not supposed to reveal anything specific about the test, but there's a lot of technologies that are in those courses, in the prep courses, that come up on the test. And it's a lot of the newer features in the OS that maybe you don't use in production in your environment. But having been through a couple of classes like that, it definitely leaves you a better rounded sysadmins to know both the old way and the new way.
Yep.
Or all three ways in some cases, because it's been 20 years. Things have changed twice, 3 times.
Absolutely. Pyro was asking, is there any hopes for the E-Links utility coming back? And that actually put a smile on my face because I remember E-Links. But Scott, I think your answer is probably apt as well as all the other ways that you could actually command line an HTTP request. What's your favorite? wget, Scott? Is that your go-to?
Yeah, that's my go-to now. I mean, so E-Links, usually I would use it to like grab a page and dump it somewhere so I could grab some data out of it or whatnot, or just like grab a file. And wget does that now.
Yeah.
And then I was just thinking about like looking at a web page in text in my browser, and it was giving me like flashbacks. So,
yep. And so we posted in the chat, RHEL 9 is officially available. You can see it there in Twitter. We no longer have to keep it a secret. It's real. Luna pointed out I use wget and links a lot, even if I should maybe use curl, because that's the thing is actually I think curl is often considered the best practice, but I don't know. I think it's been a while since I've done a lot of this kind of work, but I was always kind of a wget guy myself. Anyway,
we forgot.
What's that?
I had totally forgotten about curl.
Yeah, I was sitting here trying to think of the name, and I was going, I knew it started with a C. Cup. No, cups is like printing. No, curl. There you go, curl. But yeah, text-based web browsing experience in your terminal. Who would not want that? Let's use Gopher. I mean.
Oh, come on. I still install and occasionally use Lynx, the other one, the LYNX version.
Yeah. Okay.
Mostly when I'm mad at web developers and want to show them the error of their ways as far as accessibility. Because that's the classic trick that we've been using for decades. And I'm not in the web development world, but to make sure a page is accessible to screen readers, look at it in a text-only web browser.
Mm-hmm.
And if it looks like a complete train wreck, it's going to sound like a complete train wreck.
Right. A reader is not going to handle it all that well. So, yeah, sorry, Pyro, no luck. You're gonna have to settle for something else here. So,
but I just did that. I switched screens and did a yum list E-Links to see if it was in the ePel repository on my machine. But I want to point out this is another big difference between RHEL 8 and RHEL 9. And when RHEL 8 came out, and I know in some environments, EPEL is like radioactive and they can't touch it if you're a bank or a 3-letter agency.
Yeah, yeah.
But we use it a lot. We depend on it in the university world. And so that 6-month gap between when RHEL 8 dropped and when EPEL for RHEL 8 was available and usable really hurt. Today, there's already 3,000, 5,000 some odd packages in the EPEL repository on RHEL 9. That's a huge improvement.
Yeah, we actually invested pretty heavily because one of the things we heard from customers with RHEL 8 was that they did rely on that EPEL content, so they couldn't even consider RHEL 8 until a variety of packages were available in EPEL. So for 9, actually like a couple of years ago, we went ahead and hired some developers to work in the community to help maintain and build that and actually get that repository going earlier. There's actually I'll post it in our meeting chat, and our producer can put it out in the chat. We did a interview with Carl George, who is one of the lead engineers for that project, on another show, to just talk about like what it is and how it's managed and a variety of other things. So yeah, like Red Hat heard the feedback and made changes to get that resolved for RHEL 9.
Well, that actually takes us to a couple of things that we can kind of wrap up with here. And that is first of all, we touched upon it, but how does one prepare for the RHEL 9.1 release? What's the best way to get ready for that? Because there are some capabilities that are sought after and interesting in 9.1 that didn't make it into 9.
My favorite old sysadmin trick, rtfm. If you read the fine manual, and specifically Red Hat's pretty good about this. Read the release notes, and that's going to have the high points of everything you need to know that changed on those releases. The big one, obviously, is 9.0. Lots of stuff changed, but look at the 9.1. And generally when the beta release becomes available for download on Red Hat's site, generally they have both the software and the beta version of the documentation will be available too.
Yeah. Release notes.
And I actually for the .y releases, .1, .2, .3, I do more paying attention to the release notes than I do actually downloading and installing it.
Interesting.
It just that tells me generally what I need to know.
Yep. So sort of a last thing here is, we're going to be doing this same exercise again for RHEL 10 in 2025. What might we do differently next time around? And I would pose this to anybody who's participated in the RHEL 9 beta in chat, but Jim, you're the one joining us today. Any thoughts on what we can do next time around to make the RHEL 10 beta even better than what we did this time?
There was one conspicuous omission from all the very public and even in the high touch beta for RHEL 9, and that is the Leap upgrade tool. Was specifically not tested as part of the beta because they want to do it just for the 8.6 to 9.0, not for 8.5 to 9 beta, because it's so. I'm guessing because it's a very metadata intensive piece of software, they didn't want to have to constantly be redoing the metadata.
Well, if we could, for the people who are not familiar with it, could you actually give us a quick working definition of the tool so that people understand? Because I think it helps enlighten why that was something that might have been a tricky one to include.
Well, so Leap, L-E-A-P-P, interesting spelling there. Maybe Scott can explain the history behind it. That is Red Hat's in-place upgrade tool now, as of when RHEL 8 shipped. That was the tool for going from RHEL 7 to 8. Replaced the old RHEL tool and the FedUp tool from Fedora. So, and I did test it during the RHEL 8 beta and found all kinds of interesting issues and eventually got it working. So life was good. I don't, like I said earlier in the podcast, I'm very much into the lift and shift approach. So we don't do a whole lot of in-place upgrades, but every now and then you got a really nasty use case where, for whatever reason, application issues, it's just better to do it in place. And not
when we'd spoken previously, I think you had a very good way of describing is that, it's lift and shift is a pretty good and safe way to go if the application will let you, right? And once in a while, that's not actually the case, right?
For whatever reason that doesn't work for you, there's another option. And so like I said, I'd like to see if Red Hat can find a way to engineer it so that it is practical to beta test in future betas. That would be an awesome. That would be my RFE for RHEL 10. I don't know if they can pull it off in 3 years, but it'd be I think it'd be a good use case. And there are other customers who use it a lot, apparently. We've seen this discussion in open forums and in webinars. Big companies with tens of thousands of machines that it's not practical for one reason or another to do lift and shift on that many systems. They want a in place option. So it's good that it's there, even though I personally don't use it a lot. I have tested it. I'm probably going to end up using it for a few of my users on the academic side of the house, but and one particularly evil business app, but not go there.
Well,
but it's nice
from your mouth to Scott's ear, I think it's probably as good as done, right, Scott?
Sure. So I actually talk with the Leap team somewhat regularly. So I will suggest that. I think their initial response is going to be like, do people really leap to a .0? Which, fair. But like if we're beta and things, like let's beta the things. So yeah.
Yeah, well, right, because there were, and back in the 8.0 days the 8.0 beta, when I was testing Leap, there were issues and that were not really related to the specific release, the 8.0-ness of it. It was related to, Leap had some limitations that just made it not work under certain circumstances. And, they had to engineer around those and fix it.
Yeah, and that one was challenging because we really don't know what people do out there with our stuff. So Leap was very conservative in what it would look for potential upgrades, and I know that over the years for RHEL 8, it's become a much more resilient and capable tool thanks to customer feedback and consulting and a variety of other things to help enhance its logic and capabilities.
Well, so I am seeing that we have gone over time, but it is a momentous occasion. I guess we get to do that, don't we? So any closing thoughts, Jim, on the RHEL 9 beta and the program and sort of what we've got going on here?
Like I said earlier, boring in the best possible way. It worked really well for me. I'm really glad to see, the increased openness from Red Hat, giving all of their customers the same access that I've had to the updated software. And I'm looking forward to doing this dance again in 3 years.
All right.
That's really all there is to it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for participating in the program. Scott, any other closing thoughts from the world of RHEL?
I would just double down on what Jim said, right? I still hear people be like, RHEL 9, it's only been 3 years. It's like, yeah, well, we told you it was going to be 3 years.
We promised.
2025, it's coming sooner than you think, and it's going to be RHEL 10. So get ready.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to remind everybody to like, subscribe, and share. We were very focused on Red Hat Enterprise Linux this week, and we might return to this subject on occasion. But of course, we also our main charter is to dig deep into the world of OpenShift. So if you're interested in OpenShift, but also in containers and RHEL, please do join us on the Level Up Hour. And so thank you for joining, and go out there and grab some RHEL 9 and, see what it'll do for you. Have a good one.